Welcome. Step into the Mindora Lab. On this podcast, we will be discussing the practices, research, science, and technology surrounding alternative medicine, where listeners will gain valuable insight and information with every episode. Just as a reminder, the Mindora Lab podcast is for educational and informational purposes solely. All subjects discussed on this podcast should not be construed as medical or legal advice. You should always seek out help from a professional provider. Thank you. Good afternoon. Today I have Nick Spohn. Did I pronounce that right?
Spohn.
Spohn. We got Nick Spohn with Simply Sprout on the Mindora Lab podcast. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to come on and share your wisdom, your experience, and everything that you know about alternative medicine.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on today.
So let's jump in with the first question. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What did you think about doing career-wise when you were younger?
Well, I tell you what, I was born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri, Missouri side, which, Missouri is the show me state. So obviously that was bred into to be kind of skeptical. So after I grew up there, I actually went to the University of Missouri. I was a fitness and nutrition major there. Soon after that, my father got me a job at Ford Motor Company in manufacturing, and I really kind of learned the ins and outs of, I guess, potentialization and economy, right? Of how to build things every 46 seconds, And that took me to Chicago. Took a transfer there and just worked kind of in sales, worked a couple of startups, launched a wireless company. I've always been really into technology, really into science, again, really into fitness. And so spent a lot of time, running, half marathons, lifting weights. Yeah, it said taking on new challenges, which included spent some time in the military, did some of that. And then I worked in an R&D department over at this company called James Hardie Building Products. And basically they had an issue with their customers understanding that all the science that we put into the products, how did that make a difference, when it came to competitors' products? And James Hardie had 90% of the market in their prospective product, and people didn't understand why the price was higher and why we took price increases even during a recession. And so I was in charge of explaining that to them. So I spent years in our R&D department in our plant, taking around customers and showing them, the difference between our product, the ingredients we put in that product. We didn't use any byproducts in the product that other people did as fillers. And what that resulted in was an understanding of why we were superior and why we charged the money we did for the product. And, and people that had it understood it because obviously they had it, they used it, it was ironclad, and some people had to learn the hard way. And so kind of took some of that experience and moved it over into a couple other startups that I was a part of. And basically I got chosen by a private equity firm to go into the fintech world, right? And so they had a real hard time getting out of banking and how to show retail that what was good for banking was good for retail. And that kind of is what cannabis is today. Is banking would be like the medicinal side with a lot of regulation, or pharmaceutical side, and then retail is the fun but a lot of money side. And you kind of see the difference in mentality of customer, and how do you appeal to that side while keeping the core of your ethics and everything involved in the standards and the security of what would be the banking and federal side to the retail side. And so kind of between all those experiences, it really kind of showed me that when it comes to product, when it comes to service, the companies that really take the time to understand their product, whether it's through R&D, science, and their consumer, even though it took maybe some time to do it, were the ones that outlasted everyone else. And that really stuck with me. And that kind of led me into developing, Simply Sprout and Floteq to kind of take all that experience and all that knowledge and that approach, that scientific approach, not only to the product, but to the consumer, and be able to relate that, right? And consumable products. I mean, Steve Jobs always said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And what he meant by that was a company should handle all this sophisticated stuff. So when you get a product, you know it's solid and it's a one-button push. And so a lot of companies like to come out with things that will look good or look fun, but the science and kind of the sophistication that work hasn't been done. And so the consumer very quickly finds out it's a lot harder than they thought it was going to be, or it doesn't work the way it should be without perfect environments to use it in. And that's just a big disappointment. And that's not a long-term strategy for both your customers or you profitably. So, I'm excited to speak to that a little bit more with my companies and kind of how we approach it, how we view the rest of the market matching this.
Man, you're a multifaceted individual, that's for sure. Starting from fitness and nutrition, going to manufacturing, and then hopping into sales, those are big shifts for sure. And what was the product that you guys were building at James Hardie once again? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, the product that we built there is called fiber cement, and a lot of people don't know what that is, but they're usually walking on it every day. But what it is a product that has the properties of cement, but has the pliability and weight of wood. They use it for exterior cladding. So they basically mold it like wood, but it doesn't move, meaning it has dimensional stability. Mm-hmm. And so when you paint something, basically you want that substrate to not move because it'll crack the paint and the paint will fall off. And what we found through our R&D was our competitors, every single one of them used a byproduct called fly ash. And basically what it did was it made the board lighter, it made it easier to use, but the end result was it would fall apart, disintegrate, and everything else. So what it was actually intended for was compromise. Mm-hmm. And so they would sell for cheaper, they would try to undercut the price. And so it created an issue in the market, right? Because it confused the consumers, like, well, they're both fiber cement. Why do they cost half as much? Right. And instead of following them and cutting our own costs as the market leader, we could have done that. We could have done it easily and increased our margins exponentially, right? And that just wasn't the right thing to do. The right thing to do was to educate the consumer in the market on why we use the technology we use, why we use the ingredients that we use, and why that resulted in something that would last a lifetime for their use. And I really respected that mentality because, like I said, there was an easy way out, and they didn't take it. They invested and they doubled down on their customers' education because they cared about the customer and they cared about the future of their company. And I think that's an important principle that every company should look at, especially in the cannabis industry.
Absolutely. I take that same approach with taking a form of easy to understand educational, templates that can break down why you're doing a certain practice for the product that you're building so that the consumer understands that, okay, this is why the extra steps are needed. This is why the cost of it is going to be at a premium. And this is why the competitor is selling at half the rate because their product simply isn't going to last in the long run.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. So, when was the first time that you were introduced to alternative medicine such as cannabis?
Well, I think it was in 2018. I had pretty much never in my life, minus a couple, encounters in college back in the 1900s. Was basically, my buddies had smoked marijuana and they still do to this day and have ever since, that time. And it just wasn't really for me. I'm a high energy individual and I came from a very religious upbringing. And so obviously, cannabis being the devil's cabbage, things of that nature, obviously was kind of frowned upon. So I just, I stuck to drinking alcohol. Right. And so with fitness and nutrition, as you study it, you find out that alcohol has so many compounds and after effects and so many derogatory effects on hormone production, and things of that nature that, being a fitness guy, it's like, well, this isn't great, So in 2018, I'm like, look, I use alcohol recreationally. Obviously, alcohol should be what's on the list of something that you can't be used for medicine, just like cocaine and things of that nature. But apparently it's, you can buy it on every street corner. And then you have marijuana and CBD and hemp, that, has exponential properties against inflammation and all these things that are helpful for anxiety. And I was like, look, I'm going to start small. I'm going to go and I'm going to get and this is, 2018, I think cannabis was introduced in Arizona medically 7 years ago. So this is kind of right after medicinal got introduced in the state of Arizona. And so I got my med card. I was lifting. I had a lot of inflammation in my hips from squatting. And I was like, I'm going to try this. And I needed some help sleeping anyway. So, and I heard good things. So my first encounter was buying a package of gummies in 2018.
Okay.
And it was transformational. I mean, it was the way that it was able to kind of help my anxiety, relax my body, help me sleep, and all these huge benefits that alcohol does the opposite of, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my first encounter with alternative medicine. Was kind of, I've always used myself as a petri dish, as a guinea pig, so I never recommend anything to anyone that I haven't tried myself. I'm a big believer in that. I'm not a brand pusher. It's just not something I'm into. I don't even wear logo shirts. All my shirts are plain. It's like, that's not what I'm about. I'm about trying something, seeing if it works. And then at that point, then that's what I'll talk about. And after doing all my research, it's, in 2018, that seemed like a good idea, and it was. And I've kind of been on that train ever since.
I love that, because after my first degree, I started getting into bodybuilding and fitness, nutrition, and then I started studying biology professional to get into medicine. And one of the courses that it took was on biochemistry. The day that my professor broke down the reasons why you have a hangover after consuming alcohol was just insane. The fact that it's such a popular social convention that's normalized is insane to me. And from that point on, I just knew that I could not do this anymore to my body, because I like having all the cognitive function available to me at any given point. I don't want to wake up the next day or the next 3 days and have the inability to recall events that happened the night before, things that I need to remember that are important to me, or even just having a depressive state of just thoughts just lingering that have no real reason to serve me. So I'm so glad that you recognize this through your journey, and you were able to take something that helped with your anxiety and also your muscle aches. So like, not only was it beneficial for your overall well-being, it also was in different layers of easing your ailments.
Absolutely, man. I mean, it's been a game changer for me. It just exactly what you said. I mean, it's, when you drink alcohol, the old saying is like, well, I don't want to ruin tomorrow today, and like, that's what it does. It's like, you have a good time tonight. Yeah, it's great in that moment. And like you said, you can't recall stuff, but then you wake up the next day, depending on how bad that hangover is, and it ruins that entire day of productivity, disrupting brain waves, obviously hormone disruption. And then that leads into sometimes the second day. And if you're going to be a productive individual that wants to be high functioning and do whatever it is you do, whether that's lifting weights, you're a businessman person, whatever that is, it just doesn't sound to me, it didn't feel like to me that alcohol was the end game for that, So I couldn't be more thrilled that I opened my mind to it, even through all the upbringing that I've had of, that this is a bad thing and, all of this stuff. It's like, do your own research has always been something that I think people have forgotten. They go straight to the opinion machines on X or Twitter or whatever it's called. and just listen to somebody say an opinion, not even science backed, not a fact, and they're getting paid to promote a product, and then all the lemmings do it. And it's like, no, do the research. The research isn't on Twitter. It's not on Facebook and Instagram. That's not where research is done. Research is done in a lab. There's medical papers that are developed. And I apologize on behalf of math, biology, and physics, but it just is what it is. We live in a physical world, and things are just true or not. Nobody's opinion has anything to do with anything, and it shouldn't. It should be, this is what the science says, this is what it does, and I'm going to find out what works for me based on those principles. And I think if people did that a little bit more, they would come to the same conclusions.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I am driving this podcast forward, because I want to connect with the audience and give them the push to start looking into what they're taking at a deeper level. And if I can present information in a way that is digestible, that is relatable, and isn't super scientific in terms, then I've done my job, where I've been able to take a concept, condense it, and then drive it home to like, all right, how are you going to go apply this? Or if not, maybe this was just an idea that you can take, and maybe it'll unlock something later down the road. That's what the intention is for.
Absolutely. I mean, we need more people like you doing things like this in the world to kind of remove the veil and the mask of what really happens behind closed doors, and when we're actually getting sold and ingesting. I mean, it's paramount that people know. And I mean, everybody makes their own decisions, right? I mean, I don't care if you eat a McDonald's. I'm never going to tell you that it's good for you. But at the same time, like, you make your own choices. But if you don't know, and I can tell you, I think you would make a different decision on a lot of those products, and like, it's, I think people that are willing to say the things that people aren't trying to hear, especially, only when they're factual. Again, like, opinions are opinions, but I mean, when you have facts and science that you can boil down and give to people, those are tools. I mean, they can actually use those and take those and implement those and see how it works for them and see the difference themselves, and not get caught up in a label or a brand or an opinion. I mean, that's how the world's going to change. And I don't care if it's the cannabis industry or whatever industry, right? I mean, transparency is the best salesperson, especially when it's fact and database.
Right. No, and we need more independent thinkers, ones that are willing to step out of their comfort zone and challenge the social belief of, okay, this is what everyone is thinking right now, but how do I get out of this groupthink? How do I get into a state of being uncomfortable and being real with myself? And I think that is the first step of growing, is that you have to get into that level of uncomfortableness with yourself, and you just say, and these are the things that I'm recognizing that I want to change, and just keep moving forward.
Absolutely.
So next question that I wanted to ask you is, how did you find yourself in the cannabis field after all of these experiences in different industries, and what inspired you to start growing your own business?
Well, what was kind of crazy was through the pandemic, I was working with a company in fintech, and it became very apparent to me that, that wasn't what my life's calling was anyway. I was just kind of a hired gun. And so living through the pandemic, I kind of realized if I had to sustain myself, would I be able to do it? And I asked myself that question and say, where are the gaps in Nick Spohn that needed to be educated and filled and bridged to be self-sustaining, And
right.
What became very apparent during the pandemic, when the world shut down, was we depend on a grocery store for everything, and basically you have packaged products that contain almost 50 kinds of additives and chemicals that aren't even legal anywhere else in the world to be in products, right? I mean, they're literally US only products because the FDA just, I don't want to say just doesn't care, but I guess they feel like people make choices. We're in a free country, so if people want to ingest these things, that's on them. And it's like, okay, so I'm dependent on this grocery store. I don't know how to grow anything. The only growing experience I ever had was helping my grandfather with his garden when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking back to that time, and I was like, wow, my grandfather did this, he did that. And he could have self-sustained during this pandemic. He was ate out of his garden. My grandmother canned things, just like grandparents did back in the 1900s. And we've kind of lost it. It's kind of like GPS and MapQuest and a compass and a map, right? It's like, right. If I gave somebody a compass and a map today, 99% of the population would say, what is this? And what is this? They have no idea what they're looking at. They can't tell north, south, east from west. And that's because we built products and used technology to kind of bridge those things. And that's great, right? But we don't have the skill sets. If we had to, we were dropped in on an episode of The Survivor. We're not surviving, man. And so that really inspired me to kind of, ask a lot of deep questions about myself, where I wanted to head with my life and that type of situation. And I knew after going back to 2018 with my epiphany with cannabis and CBD and how it changed my life, I was like, I really want to be a part of this industry. And I saw that once I took a deeper look into the growing side of it and what was going on, there was a massive gap in people not understanding how it's made and how easy it is to grow and hard it is to grow, for that matter, our process, which I know you have experience with. That there's a lot of steps but it doesn't have to be that hard. And why are people paying $20 a gram at a dispensary when they can grow for $1.50? And what's so hard about this? Like I need to figure this out, because that's a ridiculous amount of delta. And so there must be some sort of magic show happening that I need to educate myself on. I'm interested. You got my attention. And so as my team and I started drilling down, we started finding out that, there's some complexity to growing. There's a couple rules that you have to follow. And, photo periods, meaning, the plants change their hormone levels with different durations of light per day. So, when your plants are in veg, you need 18 hours of light. When it's time to flower, they need 12 hours of darkness. And, it sounds simple, but it's not. If you've ever done an indoor grow, it's like, those timings and all that stuff are very important. And so people just kind of like, I'll just buy it. And I started looking at it and I'm like, well, if most of the time when people decide to not do something themselves and buy a product, it's usually out of expense or ignorance, right? Those are the two things, right? You don't see people with tobacco plants back in the 1970s growing tobacco, drying tobacco, rolling their own tobacco and then smoking the cigarettes, because it was such a hassle that and cigarettes were cheap. So they would just buy cigarettes. But when it came to marijuana, it was like, well, people are paying 20x to get pre-rolls that they could do them. It's like, that's a lot of money. Like, that's just not a thing. And so, and as home growing's been a thing forever. It's nothing new. But at the same time, the practices were still hillbilly moonshine sort of practices. And you still have the same issues like pathogens, mold, all this stuff that's going. And so it was almost dangerous because of the ignorance people had, even though they were motivated by the economy. Right. And so what I was looking at is like, I need to create a company that addresses everything for everyone when it comes to the health and safety, but also reducing the complexity and giving something consumable in knowledge. First off, consumable in knowledge that's like, I can do this. I can attempt this. I can grow my own medicine if I want. I don't need to depend on big cannabis to do that. And should I depend on big cannabis to be responsible to give me a product that's worth paying for? And when I started asking those questions and started doing research, almost, I would say, definitely not enough of those answers were correct or what they should have been. Almost none of them were. And it was just kind of like, okay, this is where the change needs to happen. We need to get into a space where we can educate people, show them how to home grow, show them how to create their own medicine, and come up with processes and technology that kind of remove all the variables, create that easy button we were talking about. They can do it. They can do it confidently, and they can get a product that they can consume safely and at a cost that anyone can afford, right? And so just really lowering that delta. I mean, science and technology is the ultimate deflationary device. With all this inflation that we have in the world, usually technology takes all that and just squashes it, right? I'll use an example. Like, think about Uber. When someone drives for Uber, 70% of all that money goes to the driver, as it should. They're doing the skill, right? But when you think of like full self-driving and the car does it, it doesn't cost anything for that car to drive you around. So theoretically, you could cut 70% of that cost out and still make the same profit margins if you're Uber. And obviously, Travis Kalanick was trying to do that, before, obviously, we still don't have full self-driving, but you can see how that would make, getting around town $3 instead of, 20. And that would be, that's a good result. You're getting the same result for a fraction of the cost, and utility and value far outweigh what it used to be, and technology is responsible for that. And so taking those principles into the cannabis industry and say like, hey, I love that you guys were able to make $20 per gram because you basically got not a free license, but you bought a license to sell drugs from the state. And, that's what you treated it as. And so you can sling whatever you want across those shelves because the state says you can. And the price is just hung up there. Now, I'm in Arizona. Arizona is the second highest revenue in the country for cannabis. It's not the second biggest market. It's the second highest in revenue because our prices here are 2 to 3x what they are in California and Colorado. Why? Because we only have 150 licenses, whereas California and Colorado have thousands, so there's no competition. And that makes it even worse, right? So now we have high prices, and now we have a captive audience. And now, just this past year, there was 5 recalls on grows because they got caught with, fungus and bacteria, and they were selling it on the shelves, right? And you get that from a lack of education, no competition, and the prices are astronomical. And even if I had a med card, I still have to pay the sticker price. I just don't have to pay the extra 17% of retail tax, or whatever they call it, for the retail side. So it's not like I'm getting it for $10 a gram. I'm still paying 20. I'm just not paying 23 like the retail guy next to me, once it went recreational. And so again, no one learned anything. If anything, legislation and the lobbyists for big cannabis have lobbied against, having these things in place to increase the competition because they want the most money for the least amount of work. And, I'm not trying to disparage anyone. I mean, that's the name of the game of capitalism. But when people are ingesting stuff that is supposed to be medicine, and even if it is recreational, they're ingesting it. This is something they put in their bodies, right? You have to have an obligation. You should have an internal obligation, even if not a regulated one, to make the best, safest product possible. And the way that the big cannabis has been able to go to market, and I think the biggest reason why it's not federally legal is because everyone truly knows that everybody is just doing just enough to get by for the most amount of money. And as we know, good enough is the enemy of the best. And, and if people are buying, then I don't have to change. And I hope that people can recognize, through podcasts like yours and other sources of information and science and fact that, people do have an obligation. This stuff isn't hard. They could actually make more money with better technology, produce a better product. It's just, they're not forced to. And so I think that, that's where I'm coming from is, bringing that into cannabis. And like I said, when we started Simply Sprout, that's what the mission was, is let's get people what they need, show them how to do it, give them processes and technology to achieve that. And by, keeping that cost down, and it's legal to grow here. We have grower, we can grow 6 plants per person, 12 per household. So we're able to do it. It's just they're not being enabled to do it in a way that deters them from the big cannabis and the dispensaries. And so that's what we aim to do. And we started that back in 2021.
I love it, man. I think the approach that you're taking is one that not many actually consider when they're starting out in the cannabis space, because at first you just think of, okay, this is a lucrative market that I can break into, and each state is going to have their own set of standards, own regulations, and own market cap. And with that in mind, then you start to think about the competitors and how can I reach the lowest prices with the most output. and get my product, my brand name on the shelves so that people can start buying it at a low price, and I keep going lower and lower and lower, producing shittier quality product. So
Right.
I think with how your experience in the past with working with other companies, especially in manufacturing and in sales and the R&D focus, you're combining all of that based on the experience that you had in 2018. That it like it's crazy to think that in 3 years you started a company from one product that you saw significantly changed your life. I've been using cannabis since I was 15, so it's going on like 18 years now that I've been consuming cannabis, and like seeing it grow from black market to recreational in 2016 in Las Vegas to where it's at now, with having cannabis conventions all over the place, with people that are presenting their research, presenting their data, and getting that to the public is incredible to witness. So I love what you're doing with your approach and your business structure, because there definitely needs to be more people challenging the standards. And I think with interstate commerce coming online, that is going to force brands to have competitors. That is going to make people have to grow better, process better, and educate the consumer better. Because if you have one state, like I admired the growers in Oregon, I spoke to a lot of them, all the outdoor growers, because they were actually focusing on their soil. And that mountain soil does something to the outdoor cannabis up there. And that's why it's some of the best weed in the United States. That's my opinion anyways. I've tried, all throughout the West Coast and some in Colorado, and I just nothing compared to the practices that the people who are actually cultivating a plant based on their passion and not the profit margin.
Oh, absolutely. It's insane how it's completely understood and accepted that if you're going to, let's say I want to build a vineyard and a winery, right? Like I probably am not going to grow grapes with any kind of quality using the soil in my backyard in Phoenix, Arizona. I probably don't have the right climate. I don't have the right soil. You see where I'm going with this, right? And like, people understand where the best wine comes from. They understand that. That's why it's called wine country, or
Right.
whatever. That every state that gets a cannabis approval, because it has to be grown in state, somehow does that. Now, we're obviously, there's obviously indoor growing facilities, and that's what we have here. But it's just kind of one of those things where, it's just weird how people will totally understand the wine business, but totally just ignore it when it comes to the cannabis industry,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally hear that, man. And I guess this leads into the next question. It's perfect timing. What are the challenges of starting a business in the cannabis industry?
I think the biggest challenge in the cannabis industry is what you have is a war on brand and perception more than a mission for quality of product. And I think the challenge in that statement is everybody entered the market like a gold rush. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't have been. I mean, the legalization of marijuana and hemp is one of the best things I think that could ever happen. So that's great. That's a good thing, right? But I think that the focus on money is we do it the American way, right? Capitalism, which again, I'm a huge capitalist. You should build a product worth buying and you should get paid for it. That's not against that. I think that's great. But when the focus is how fast can I put something on the shelf with the coolest label and then go to all these conferences you're speaking of, and basically it's a brand contest of who can spend the most money to who can afford to give out the most free product with the cutest label on it to get people hooked. I mean, it just took me back to when I was in college. You go to a college, I don't think they're allowed to do this anymore, but you go to a college campus, the first thing you're going to see is people with credit cards and, and free cigarettes. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, they know if they get you with that brand, with that product, the loyalty is through the roof, right? And so they're just basically predators on that simple concept, and not about the highest quality. You never see pictures of the lab. You only see pictures of the labels and some famous guy, hand trim this or whatever. You never see pictures of the lab. I mean, this is a product that's supposed to be a medicinal product at the heart of it. And where's the lab? If I'm watching a YouTube on a new pharmaceutical product, and I'm not promoting, big pharma either, but they're not showing, they're kind of not showing that type of stuff. They want to build credibility. And I think we skipped the credibility in cannabis. And I think that's the biggest challenge is now that we skipped that and we went brand focused, we went, price focused, and we've treated it like a product and not a medicine. I think their challenges now is once the consumer gets educated by podcasts such as this and by doing their own research, I think their biggest challenge is going to be getting that credibility back and keeping those same profit margins, because people are going to realize that what they were buying was kind of trash with a different label on it. And I think, that challenge is what we're trying to solve at Simply Sprout, is not only educating the consumer, but kind of educating, big cannabis on, hey, if you guys don't wake up and you guys don't start promoting the health and the science and all these other types of things that you're doing with this product to make it better, I think it's going to be a real struggle. I mean, you've seen profit margins get destroyed. People say, oh, cannabis is failing. Well, cannabis isn't failing. The cannabis industry's margins are failing. There's never been, every day more and more cannabis gets used. It even takes a bite out of alcohol. I mean, alcohol's seen a decline ever since the introduction, the mass introduction of cannabis in the nation. Alcohol percentages are down. Obviously I watch both at Floteq and Simply Sprout. And so when you see a product that's taking away from alcohol, my hat's off, I'm clapping, right? But unfortunately, if it's not done in the right way, and what's the end result going to be? Is it going to be, this was a joke, or we kind of got some disease from some sort of byproduct that was done with the processing of that cannabis? We don't know those things. And so we want it to taste like candy. We want to do this. Well, what's all the implications of that? Those questions aren't being asked because there's so much money to throw at it. Who cares? And I think that the issue today is consumers getting education, and I think it's brands being transparent, which they're not for the most part. A lot of buzzwords, a lot of, this guy did this, it was good. This guy is the new guy on the block, or doing something new. Isn't really ever the question. It's what's the most I can get for the money? And so their margins are getting destroyed. So when they say big cannabis is failing, yeah, the business side is, because they're getting price compression, and people are starting to wake up and knowing and finding out that that's, just like anything with competition, the price comes down, but their practices haven't changed. So the quality is the same. Yeah. The research hasn't enabled any kind of efficiency or bioavailability where it allows them to lower the dosage for the same effects for a lower price. But we're not interested in that. They're not interested in any of those things. If they were, we would see massive gains in that technology, because there's so much money in cannabis. It's just not being spent in the right places. 99% of cannabis money goes to promoting the product, and only 1% goes to researching it. And on that infinite timeline, it is only destruction for both profitability and credibility.
Right. And, I've seen this a lot. That happens in Oregon, especially. That's the market that I was there for the longest time, where companies were looking at their profit margins dwindling every year, and they were focusing on capturing either new customers that are coming online that were cannabis curious, or existing ones that started to slowly change and buy other product brands. And they're like, okay, so which approach do we take? And what I saw frequently was a shotgun approach. Instead of being a sniper with focus on one particular product that your brand is known for, that your company is known to produce, they did this spray everywhere. And okay, let's release a gummy. Okay, let's release a tincture. Okay, let's release a vape. Okay, let's release this flower that we didn't properly grow. Okay, why are we not seeing any increase in profit margin? Well, because you're taking zero time to put any effort into building a product that people can trust. You haven't tested it through research and development enough, and because you're rushing it to the market that's already saturated.
Absolutely. I mean, we have our chief health officer over at Simply Sprout and even at Floteq, Michael Casey Palmisano. He spent years in public health and years in startups for telehealth, and so he both promotes technology and public health is very important, right? Because it looks at the overall health of a population, not just what's this do specifically for you necessarily. It's good for everyone. How does this help public health? And
Right.
and we're not going to make any friends in California right now, but in 2023, this year, 90% of the plants grown in California have top latent viroid, which basically decreases yield and quality, and it's a pathogen, right? And that comes from just horrible growing practices. We talk about mother plants, that we cut clones from, and how we replicate after a pheno hunt, where, and for those listening, a pheno hunt is, obviously you take, 10 seeds and you plant them, you flower them, and then for test the best, you've taken clippings from every plant, whatever tests the best, that's going to be your new mother plant. That's what you're going to mass produce, right? And that would be the practice, right? So when 90% of plants have top latent viroid, it's because it's transferred through hardware usually, whether it's, cutting of the plant with infected, or cutting an infected plant, cutting another plant. And 90% of the plants grown this year in California have that pathogen in them. And what that tells me is if they knew anything about the science, anything at all, they would start over, grow from seed, and obviously go through the same process of pheno hunting, find the best strains. And then what you do is you use, tissue culture, or, there's a term or process called totipotency, which basically was discovered in the 70s, to where every plant cell has the ability to replicate the entire structure of the plant, right? And so this is, and tissue culture is done in a very sterile environment. It's clean of bacteria, pathogens, and everything else. And you can keep those plants in stasis. You can put them in cryostasis, to where you can get them so cold that the cell division stops or is obviously paused, right? And if they were using that type of, I want to say even technology, I mean, it's just a principle of biology, they could have libraries, and that's what we build at Simply Sprout, is a genetic library of pure plants that have been tested and kept in sterile environments. So whenever they go out to grows and they've been multiplied, you have a perfect plant. But obviously that growing practice, with 90% of that plant population in California being infected, which is spread over to Arizona as well. Obviously, we're right next door. Everything spreads, right? Just like COVID. And no one cares. Because if they cared, we wouldn't have got there. So it's just ignoring biology for in the name of profit. But what's funny about it is that principle, like I said, that pathogen, if you take that principle and apply that pathogen decreases yield. So you're growing all these plants, let's say it's 70% of their yield. It's like you're only shooting yourself foot on an infinite timeline, because your price has to increase to get the same margins on 70% of the product. And so it's like you're killing yourself doing it, while putting out infected plants into distillates, into edibles, into flour. And again, it's like that if they didn't know
That would be one thing. This is not information that, this isn't the alien documents that have been released by the government. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is out there. Like, this is crazy to me. And it's disappointing, because I think if the market and consumers knew that that's how much someone didn't care about their product, their craft for that matter, they would have a different perception on where are they getting their product, who grew it, who's selling it to me, and who's responsible for this. And these are the questions that need to be answered if we're ever going to solve the challenges in the cannabis industry, And again, it even comes down to profitability. Like, it's insane on so many different levels that something like that would be would happen in 2023. Like, I mean, it's 2023. It blows my mind, right? We're talking about AI. We're talking about flying cars that drive themselves, and yet we don't know how to not infect plants because we're using, scissors that cutting other infected plants, and are just too lazy or just don't care. You know what I'm saying? To do it the right way.
Yeah, and I mean, it goes back to just poor practices that if you're focused on just making the most money possible, then you're going to cut corners. And that's what I see a lot of happening currently, is that a lot of chasing the dollar amounts to just overall poor standards. And, earlier I wanted to touch base on what you said about the pharmaceutical industry having standards of showing the practices, showing the data. Now, we know that sometimes that can be flawed and that can be biased against people that want to actually get a drug released onto the market, even if it doesn't work, but it could be in the best interest of someone profiting off of it. However, a lot of the medicine that we have in Western medicine today has gone through extensive research to keep people alive when they need it the most, when they end up in hospitals. I'm not discrediting the medical field at all, and I applaud the pharmaceutical industry for actually having standards in place, protocols that can be replicated worldwide, because that is what is necessary. I mean, this was the same thing that we saw post-pandemic. We saw scientists actually sending each other data of the experiments that they were conducting on these COVID variants, making conclusions that, okay, I was wrong, you were right, this country is moving in the right direction. Now let's replicate the experiment that they were doing to see if we get the same results, and then come to the conclusion of, all right, this is how we're going to combat the problem. We have a solution because we went through collaboration, because, again, science is falsifiable. If you have something that proves the theory is wrong, then you move forward with the new theory until that gets proven wrong, and then you just keep making better and better adjustments so that the consumer is always at the forefront and you are taking care of them, because at the end of the day, we're all the consumer, we're all the patient.
Right. I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's just, it's mind-blowing to me that, I call it, there's people that know their truth. And I'm using big quotations to myself here, like, know their truth. And that phrase always makes me kind of smile and smirk, because it's like, you should always be on the journey and search for truth. Meaning, we're always going to find something better. We're always going to find a better way of doing things. Science always changes. We have wonderful scientists out there running experiments every day on everything, right? And people look at, the United States as kind of the, I guess, one of the, obviously the biggest country to kind of somewhat accept cannabis. And why don't these other companies accept cannabis? And I go back to, well, there's 50 compounds that, every other country in the world doesn't even allow in their food system, right? And it's just maybe not good enough. No one's ever asked them that. It's like, it's not because they're all, I guess, short-sighted and closed-minded, as much as you guys haven't figured this out. We'll let you guys figure it out. And when we believe that product's worth having and is safe, maybe we will legalize it in England or, where, it's like, we're asking the wrong questions. We're blaming it on the wrong mindset, right? And like I said, that search for truth, through facts and data and science is something that we're short on. We're short on that, and we're long on profits. We're long on marketing. We're long on, how many people can we get through the door? And maybe we fix it, maybe we don't later. And like you said, that's a shotgun approach. It's, kill them now, grill them later kind of deal. I don't know. I think those are the biggest challenges. And again, there's lots of other challenges. I mean, I know your experience is, in an actual process and a company, and you're sitting here asking questions like, well, we should do it this way, or this is harmful. And then, all of a sudden, you're looking for another job possibly, right? And it's like,
Right.
I'm just trying to find the best way to do it. I'm not saying I know, but I know that this isn't the right way based on these 2 or 3 principles. And to go back to your, pharmaceutical conversation, we talk about, big pharma. And again, I'm not promoting big pharma, but at the same time, they have their place. We have things in place in testing. Again, all that stuff can be falsified. But I'll tell you one thing, when there is a commercial about big pharma, they have to list out and say what the side effects are. They have to say with like, because of this process, because we relieve headaches, but side effects may cause nausea, like whatever.
Yep.
We don't do that in cannabis. Like we're not following those standards. And so like, as much as people want to beat up on big pharma, it's like, well, if big cannabis had to put the same things on their labels based on the science and products and compounds, it'd be a different ballgame. Let the consumer know what's in there. And if they want to consume anyway, then it becomes a choice. Then that's a choice. Not a, cannabis is cannabis. It's like, well, no, it's not. There's a very big difference between, smoking, ingesting gummies, the way that you create cartridges, oils, all that stuff matters. And they have different properties and possible side effects that people just don't understand because the industry wants you to know that it's just weed. They have a great price or they have great packaging. And that doesn't fly on any pharmaceutical shelf anywhere in the world, And so when somebody says, well, I can't believe the federal government will, legalize marijuana. I can believe that. Makes sense to me why they don't do it. You know what I'm saying? Like we're even close to even proving that we're legitimate, right? And no one seems to be concerned to do it. And so everybody can sit back and complain about how all the old farts in Congress won't legalize marijuana. But when it comes down to it, like if people would educate themselves to the level that these other people are educated on, again, there's lobbyists and stuff that change those things, just like data can be skewed. But it's like, I don't know. I understand it. I mean, I'd have a hard time saying, well, let's mass produce 90% pathogen marijuana in our biggest market in California. Yeah, let's make it available to everybody. It's like, no one's going to do that. Like, you know what I mean? Because it just, there's not. And they shouldn't, So until big cannabis gets its act together from a quality standpoint, scientific, biological, mathematical standpoint, they're never going to be legitimate. It's always going to be a marketing game and it's not going to be a medicine game.
Yeah, no, I completely hear you on that. And I think, to play devil's advocate, and someone's told me this before, comparing the food industry to cannabis, and it's like, well, that apple that you're eating probably has the same level of pesticides, if not more, on it compared to the cannabis that you're about to smoke. But my rebuttal would always be, well, this level of pesticide concentration that's in this vape cartridge or that's on these plants, you're inhaling and that's going directly into your bloodstream versus you ingesting something going directly through your liver. The level of toxicity is not the same. And for the food industry, like that still needs to always get addressed, because that's what you announced in the beginning of this, is that, McDonald's was essential and growing outside and not being within 6 feet of each other wasn't. So you have to really start paying attention to the overall bigger picture, that there needs to be these standards in place. Otherwise, we are just running around with no rules whatsoever, and we are all leading towards the same result.
Well, I mean, I'll do you one better. Somebody wants to compare the food industry, and we'll use your example of, well, that apple probably has more pesticides or just as much as that or marijuana might have more than the apple. It's like, be better. I'm not saying that's right. Be better. Like,
right.
I mean, I don't care what that apple has in it. You're not in the apple business, so that we're not talking about apples. Be better. Apple's never been considered a medicine. It's not sold on a shelf for $20 a gram. be better. You have the money to do it, be better. You know?
Absolutely. So the next thing that I wanted to address is, and this is going to be a good one for you. How do we grow into being a respectable field and not laughed upon?
Well, I think that, unfortunately, the stigma of cannabis, especially, you looked at movies like Dazed and Confused, which is unfortunately most people's interaction with cannabis. So, that's, you're always going to live down that stigma. But, the one thing that big pharma has to do is they have to do, obviously, case studies. They have to present their data. They have to have, obviously test groups and double blinds and all these things for the claims that they make, and I think the path to doing that is somebody until it is regulated is to self-regulate, and so basically, when you have a cannabis company that's like, look, I'm not just going to talk about how great my brand is. I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to show you. And there's companies out there that do that. One of them is actually in your home state of Oregon. I know where it's produced, is New World CBD. Now they only do hemp and they do ingestibles and, edibles and things of that nature, but they have a focus on diabetics, right? So none of their products have any sugar on them. They have a awesome group that I think they're 35,000 strong in their group. Basically, like, how do we ingest CBD to kind of calm to reduce inflammation in the body, which is what everything boils down to. And how do we do that for everyone? Not just putting a sugary gummy that's quote unquote vegan out there in the market and then just having people eat sugar, because obviously sugar is one of the most inflammatory things you can put in your body. So it's kind of counterproductive, So it's when companies start actually like scientifically saying and proving that they're doing what they're doing, they study bioavailability. I mean, New World CBD does that too. I mean, I was introduced to this technology where they use binders that basically allow it to bypass the liver. Obviously, when your liver works hard, it's not good. That's where you get cirrhosis. And so any way that you can keep the active compound in the bloodstream, again, that's saying that, assuming that compound is safe, you need less of that compound because obviously it's not getting devoured by the liver and processed. And you can have the same effects. And so, they're on the search, again, that search for knowledge, that search for truth. Their products didn't start out like that. They started out as making products like everyone else with the technology they had and kept on seeking it out. And this technology is not free. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they had to go and invest in that. But at the end of the day, it allowed them to go to market with a story that's able to explain to people why it's better, how it's better, show the science, show the binders, show the molecules, right? And you can't argue that, and I think that's how we find legitimacy is not just telling, but showing people what are we doing in the cannabis and CBD industry to make it better, to make it safer, to reduce costs. And how you do that is a before and after picture, right? And say 5 years ago, this is how your products were made. 5 years later, they're made this way. I mean, look at every car company, look at every phone company. It's like, they don't say the iPhone didn't come out in 2007 and then we have the same iPhone. And it's different. Everything's better. It's improved. It improves every year. And when you look at the cannabis industry, we just don't. And so with that stigma, that's already, saying, oh, people are just out there getting high, doing whatever. There's not a story to go along with it saying, no, on the medicinal side of it, this is how we're improving the medicine. This is how we're doing this, how we're making it better. This is why we should be federally legal. That story is not in the market. You cannot find that story hardly anywhere, and there's a lot of bad actors out there that are, again, they're marketing machines. They're not, obviously medical companies, and maybe they're not trying to be, and that's fine, I guess. But to remove that stigma, it's going to take a lot of research and work, and then presenting that in a consumable way to the consumer so they understand, wow, these people are out to change something. This speaks to me. And we're just like New World, it's like, we're going to address diabetics. That's a medical condition. And we have these types of products that can help them. And we made them that way. And then that story goes out and, that's how things change. But that's just not the story for almost anyone in big cannabis right now. And I think as long as that is void, we're going to struggle as an industry to gain that legitimacy because we haven't earned it.
Love that. I love everything that you said there because it's very accurate. You're pointing out, you know, different angles that I haven't even thought of as well. Because let's say, for instance, like if you had to put on the label that this cannabis that was processed into a vape had 10% mold on it, it had this on it, would you fucking buy that? No. Would you buy something that had residual solvents in it for a gummy? Like, okay, I'm consuming this. Oh, wow, I feel kind of loopy. Why is that? Oh, because there's alcohol still in it. And what scared me the most about, the amount of products being released after the CBD industry crashed was all of these new variants of the molecules coming out that were providing different psychoactive effects. And it's like, okay, how are you guys producing this? Let's see the techniques. What solvents are you using to make these and convert these molecules from CBD into a new property? What are the byproducts that are coming out from this process? Do you know? Have you sent it to an analytical lab that's third party that is not a cannabis testing laboratory, an actual like pharmaceutical grade or food grade in that matter, to identify the other compounds that are in the product? This is definitely a big gray area that is not being addressed. And I hope to have more people that listen to this podcast who are chemists come forward and start addressing these issues and how we're going to resolve them, because that's the only way that we start growing to being in a respected industry, where now we have the evidence and the results that are being shared publicly, so that it's not hush hush, like this is secret IP. No, let's get to the bottom of this. Let's make sure that this industry stays alive by doing the right thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it just comes down to, again, the transparency. It's let's just say there's 6 different ways to make a cartridge, right? Let's say there's 6 of them, and there's got to be one that's better than the rest, right? And so if that was on the label and it says, listen, we've got our distillate lab tested for like residual solvents and all this other stuff in there, and the process used was X, and people look at the label like, oh, I've heard that's not very good, because it can have this and this and that, and again, I won't get specific with it, but like at least it gives the consumer enough knowledge to say, listen, I don't care, it's the cheapest, cool. Again, they made a choice, right? Like, I'm all about people having free will and choice, but at the same time, like if they're not educated and they don't know, then it's very deceitful. They say, well, it's a cartridge, and we both know that's not the case.
Right.
The case, right? But if you're not willing to put your science out there, talk about it, talk about your process, whether it's a growing process or a manufacturing process, there really can't be any credibility, because how can there be? There's no information. One of the processes we use at Simply Sprout is sublimation. And so the biggest gap in growing really isn't watering the plants and not even the light changes. And obviously those are all things that have to happen, right? NPK, or the nutrients that you put in to grow, these things matter, and they matter a lot. But 70% of what's going to go wrong happens in the dry cure process, because what you have is a very controlled environment. And again, this is a hillbilly concept, but like it's the 60-60, it's like 60 degrees, 60% humidity, and that's how you dry. And when the stem snaps, then it's ready, and then it's time to trim and cure. Well, that process, one, just doesn't make any sense, right? Like if I gave you if I told you that your strawberries have to go sit and basically rot for a few weeks, and then we process it into jelly, as opposed to how Simply Sprout does it, you'd be like, yeah, that doesn't sound right. That sounds like them hanging in a room of being damp is not great, right? Like a damp basement. Doesn't sound like a good idea. And so what we use is sublimation. And what we're able to do is when we take in a customer's harvest, home grow, we basically cool it down to -40 Celsius, and then we cryo trim it. So basically, it's a tumble trim where no hands touch it, no scissors touch it, and that just sounds healthy. But at the same time, it allows for a better trim, and it allows for 30% of the active compounds, whether that's going to be THC, CBD, CBN, and all the terpenes, all our oil-based properties, 30% more potent, right? So we actually have a better yield. And then basically when we take it out of that trim process, it can stay frozen for as long as, theoretically, as long as you want to keep it frozen if it's in the right type of packaging. And then we process it with sublimation, which is basically taking down the pressure. We put it under vacuum, and then we draw the moisture out, and we bring the temperature from -40 Celsius up to about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And what that does is it allows us to draw out the water and come to a perfect 8 to 12% moisture content, which is exactly what we want cannabis to be. But it doesn't. No pest can live in that. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we basically destroy
Right.
everything and get rid of all that out of there. And that process only takes us 36 hours from start to finish. So when you think about a traditional dry and cure, and you think about mason jars, and you think about hand trimming and all that work, it takes about 8 hours to trim a pound of marijuana. And that's, obviously, are they wearing gloves? Are they changing scissors? How much THC and how much resin's on those scissors that's now not on the plant? You think about them hanging in a tent or hanging in a drying room for those weeks on end. And then eventually 6 or 8 weeks later, now we have a product that can go to market. What's the cost of that? That's the most expensive way to make a product, and that's why we had $20 a gram. It's literally, you're doing it the most expensive, most unhealthy way, right? And with our sublimation processes and processing for home growers, it allows them to grow it, flower it. They get it back in 2 days. It's completely smokable. There's no coughing, because what makes you cough when you smoke flower, a lot of times, is it's too damp, because obviously big cannabis is definitely motivated for it to be wetter because it weighs more and it's sold by weight. So that makes sense, right? And so follow the money. You know what I'm saying? And so then they get this product and they're coughing and hacking. Oh, that's great. It's like, well, you shouldn't be hacking and coughing, So what our people that grow, 90% of them are medical anyway, but when they grow, they realize, like, wow, these buds are twice the size. It's like, yeah, they're not shriveled. It's not a raisin. We keep all the structural integrity. The buds aren't brownish, wilting like they would wilt in that, and hanging up for 4 weeks or whatever you're doing for the dry cure stage. They're lime green. They're fresh. They smell fresh. They don't taste like ditchweed, which is basically what big cannabis is selling you. And like, they're 30% more potent. And so when you think about that, all that time and how many drying rooms are in big cannabis, right? Like, you think about all this space, how many people are getting paid to trim. And again, I'm not trying to wreck the economy here, but you pull all that cost out and all that space out, you can deliver a product that's better for a lot less money. And, additionally, let's say I come out with a strain, let's say it's a limited edition and I sell it, it sells out. Well, I can keep those buds frozen before I actually process them. So I can actually hold my yield, so I can release that over the course of time, instead of, it's sat on the shelf for X amount of months or whatever they put it on there for, and now I have to sell it for nothing, I have to throw it away. It's like, no, make what you need, because 3 days later you can put up brand new fresh product straight, from freeze to the shelf, right? And so it allows them to keep their finger on the pulse, and if they don't need flour, then they can take it and extract it from there. So it allows them to keep their hand on the button on their economies of scale while cutting out a ton of costs. And now we took $20 a gram down to $12 a gram at the dispensary, and we have a lot better product, a lot healthier, a lot more potent, and again, safer, better, cheaper. And that should be the goal of every cannabis company. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it preserves their profits, because they can still charge a good amount of money, keep their same profit margins. They can lower the price and deliver a better product. Again, if the interest was high enough, that's what would be happening. This stuff exists. This stuff exists at commercial scale to be bought, and it's just, there's a big resistance against it. And I don't know if it's because of, we think that some hillbilly from somewhere, found the perfect way to do it, and that's the way he's always done, that's the way his dad's done it. It's like, we wouldn't ingest that because somebody's granddad did something. We want the best product. And we're just not holding ourselves accountable in the industry to find those processes and that technology. to make that product better and to lower the cost. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things that I see that disappoints me is, you could just be better and make more money if you gave a shit, and you don't, and it's
Yeah.
obvious. Like, and
Yeah.
it's like I said, it's a branding game, not a health and wellness and make the world a better planet game. There's no mission. There's only marketing.
Mm, yep. You hit it right on the top of the head. Well, listen, I'm gonna start wrapping this up because I know you have so much more information that you could go down the
Right.
rabbit hole with, and I want you to do that. Let's save that for a future episode because I want you to come
Sure.
back on, and I want to keep talking about more pain points and more solutions that we can start bringing to the table. But to wrap up with some closing questions, just like stuff about you personally, and I like doing this with guests. It's like, all right, so what's your favorite music genre?
Oh, I'm a rocker, man. Uh,
Rocker?
no, if I had to choose, I mean, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, so when it comes to to the rap side, it's definitely Tech Nine. You'll find that in my playlist, for sure. Um, no, I'm actually really into music myself. I play the drums and I play the guitar and songwrite a little bit just for fun. Nothing special, but I do like all types of music. But yeah, my favorite's probably the hard rock stuff and even the older stuff like Godsmack and Seven Dust and stuff like that. So when I'm out in the
Mm-hmm.
greenhouse walking around, I probably am headbanging to some of that stuff.
I love that. Love that. I started out with rock and then I got into electronic music more, especially with trance. So a lot of
Hmm.
the drum, the bass still there, just drops. I just couldn't get enough of those. Um, what's your favorite food after smoking?
Oh man, this is going to be telling, but anything that it has to do with s'mores, right? So if it's like graham crackers or s'more cereal or anything that crunches and has that taste profile is probably what I'm going for first.
Let's
That's
go.
probably what's going to get depleted immediately.
Fair enough. um, Outside of growing your businesses and actually growing pot, what's your favorite hobby?
Again, like I said, I played the guitar recreationally. I mean, fitness is a thing. I walk 5 to 7 miles every morning.
Hmm.
So that gets the blood going, clears my head. So I mean, that's probably where I spend most of my time thinking and just processing what needs to happen for the day or what I want to achieve in both the businesses and things like that. Or I'll call a friend or whatever to kind of decompress. So that's probably my favorite thing to do is walking just for like every psychological and physiological benefit that it offers.
Yeah, love that, man. Start with the basics right at the beginning of the morning. Yep.
Get it
Um,
going.
Last question, what advice, and try to make this a little short one, what advice would you give to someone that's trying to break into the cannabis industry or even better, like psychedelic industry? Like what should they heed?
I think it's important, just like we spoke about, is just to start with a mission and not dollar signs in your eyes, right? Like the
Yeah.
more that people can see what you believe in and see you act on that belief, the more inspiring you're going to be and your brand's going to be. So Einstein said, strive to be of value and not of success. And
Hmm.
I took that as success is the money, but the value is what you give back. And I think that if people focus on mission and value, they'll have more money than they'd ever want, right? And so as long as that's your focus, and you can find a place in this industry that you can believe in what you're doing and know you're helping people and deliver that value back, I think you can't go wrong. And that's not exclusive to this industry, but it's
Right.
more like I said, most people want to start with the marketing and the money and focus on the dollars when the mission is what's inspiring.
Love that, man. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on, Nick. You had so much knowledge and experience that I want to keep listening to, and we're going to save that for a later time. But this was a great introduction to let people hear what's on your mind. And I think It's very beneficial to have individuals like yourself who are holding themselves to a higher standard, who are focused on their mission and are not going to be swayed by it.
Absolutely, man. No compromise.
Well, until next time, Nick, we're tuning out.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. If you enjoyed that episode, please like, subscribe, follow the Mind or a Lab podcast, and leave a rating. This helps me grow organically, and this helps spread the message to everyone else. Thank you so much. Don't stop labbing.